certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Kira Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
Never before has such a complex case been before our courts. In this bonus episode of Claremont in Conversation, we're going to run through the evidence so far. I'm Natalie Bonjolo with the West Australian's Tim Clarke and from Channel 7, Alison Fan.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so in this podcast, what we're going to try and do is bundle up what you've heard so far into a chronological timeline. So we're thinking we're going to start at the start and what we first know about the man accused, Bradley Edwards. Tim, can you take us back 8 years before the first abduction, that's Sarah Spears, to 1988?
Yeah, so this is when the prosecution say that Mr. Edwards' life of crime began, if you like. He was just out of school, just started working at Telstra, only a couple of years, and had up until that time lived in a suburb called Huntingdale, which is sort of southeast-ish of Perth, not far outside the CBD, but certainly not one of the more affluent areas of Perth. At that time, or just leading up to that time, there'd been a series of break-ins, prowler incidents they were called, in the Huntingdale area. All very similar and all quite strange, but so noteworthy that the police had actually put a little team together to look into them. Mm-hmm. And this then led up to February the 15th, 1988, when a young girl was asleep in her bedroom. She was a teenager at the time, and someone broke into her parents' house, pulled the cord from the phone line, the landline, out of the wall, shut her door behind himself, and then basically jumped on her in her own bed as she slept. She woke up. This young lady, now a woman, gave evidence to this effect, that she woke up to feel a weight on her, either side of her, was groggy, was sleepy, had a notion that it might have been her boyfriend who she spent the day with, Valentine's Day with, but then when she leaned back to feel his face, felt the stubble, knew that her boyfriend at the time had had a shave, and so realised it wasn't him, and she was being attacked basically by a stranger. There was a scuffle, a melee. She managed to fight him off, caught a glimpse of him in the doorway wearing what appeared to be a woman's nightie, and then started hammering on the wall and calling for help for her parents, who were just in the room next door, and he made his escape at that time. Her father came running, was so surprised that didn't notice that the door was shut, and basically ran into the door, and then was able to help her obviously hugely distressed daughter.
And this attack goes unsolved for 30 years, basically, at this point.
Yeah, correct. So there was a significant investigation put into it. And the main piece of evidence was a kimono that was left behind by this intruder. It was left, and I've seen pictures in court of this scene, it was left in plain sight for anyone who walked into this small bedroom. It was a silk kimono with a dragon motif that was left behind, along with some stockings that had appeared to have been knotted. They were also left behind, but that was it. There was no resolution to this break-in, to this crime for 3 decades. And what we know now is this was the start of what is already a significant series of crimes committed by Bradley Robert Edwards, but what prosecutors say it was the start of what we know is possibly one of the worst series of crimes in the history of Australia if they are all proved.
Yeah. And obviously we'll get into this later, but some of the evidence taken from that crime will be of importance down the track.
Very much so, very much so.
Okay, if we can move forward to a couple of years to 1990, and a social worker is attacked at Hollywood Hospital.
Yes, she was. But at the time, I think it was just seen as a common assault. He was charged as a common assault, so it wouldn't have come to the attention of really anybody, because those common assaults happen every night in a bar, in a family dispute, and this one was only seen as a sort of a one-off by a worker who had snapped because there were some personal issues in his life. It lasted only a few moments, and as scary as it might have been to the victim, I can see in a magistrate's court them just regarding it as just a one-off thing, and he was only given probation, so therefore it never came to the attention of any of the authorities. It wasn't a sex attack, although at the time there must have been some element because he was put on a sexual offenders program, but otherwise it was just regarded as a common assault, and he didn't obviously let his employers know, even though as a workplace it was dismissed as that, and so therefore would not have been significant in the great scheme of things.
So basically at this stage, Bradley Edwards is a Telstra technician. Talk us through this attack and what actually happened.
He was working on some equipment at the Hollywood Hospital. A social worker was sitting there. She said she thought someone grabbed her from behind, put something in her mouth. She was terrified because she thought it was something that had been laced with, and so she didn't dare breathe. He dragged her backwards and apparently was trying to take her into the toilet, but then as quickly as this attack happened, it stopped suddenly, and then he apologised. Now, we have heard evidence later from a security person who interviewed him and said, he was apologised and said, I don't know what came over me, what's going to happen with my work, and that person said, well, that's the least of your worries because you will be charged, as he was. Yes. But then again, it was just seen as a common assault. When I say just common assault, that's something that's not really that serious in later charges, and especially not because it was noted as a sexual assault.
And as you mentioned, Ali, what is interesting, and it becomes interesting down the track, is that this attack is never on his work record.
Exactly right.
Well, there's certainly no records of it in existence that have been produced to court as evidence so far, and there was a very senior Telstra employee basically brought over to Perth during the trial to display all the records relating to Mr. Edwards, his cars, his pay, his holidays and all that. And the very last question he was asked was whether there was any record of this attack in any of the records that he could search, and he said no.
Okay, let's move forward another 5 years to 1995 and a very serious attack on a 17-year-old girl.
Yes, so this is obviously a big escalation from where we've gone from 1988 to 1990. As serious as those assaults were, this is on a different level.
Terrible, terrible rape and abduction. And I think the abduction side of it is really serious, that when they deprivation of liberty or the abduction and the way he grabbed that girl, and it wasn't when I say like a date rape or something, that this was a very violent.
Yeah, I mean this is your archetypal horror movie type scenario. Young girl, again, teenager, walking home after a night out in Claremont with her friends. She'd taken the decision, I've only got 50 cents left in my pocket. A mate of mine lives up the road. I'll just jog down there and spend the night there. And that's what she was doing. It was a 10-minute walk at most. She just straight off the main footpath onto a path through a little park in Claremont when she was grabbed from behind by someone, a complete stranger, and hadn't noticed any threat up until that point. Grabbed from behind, incapacitated,
hood over
gagged,
the head,
hooded, tied up with her hands behind her back, and basically completely incapacitated, bodily lifted up and placed in a vehicle close by, where she's placed in the back. The perpetrator gets in the front and drives away. All she can do is take some notice of her surroundings, but she has no idea where she's going, who she's with, and what this person intends to do with her. They drive around for about half an hour, end up in a cemetery called Clarke Cemetery, which is only 2 minutes away from where the actual snatch abduction took place, but the drive was longer than that. She's taken to a very far corner of this cemetery, isolated, desolate. I mean, you can imagine 2 o'clock in the morning on a February morning, and is brutally degraded and sexually assaulted over some time, and it then is dumped in the bushes, just discarded by this person who we now know was Bradley Edwards.
And then she ironically runs for help to the Hollywood Hospital, the very hospital
That's
where
right.
Bradley Edwards committed that attack
Yes.
earlier. So she's, mind you, the cemetery does stretch from Claremont right through to Hollywood Hospital. So that was the nearest point, right where he was familiar with that area.
Yeah.
And that was when we first heard about Telstra vans from security guys
Yes.
who'd seen a white Telstra van in the area.
Yeah, so she manages to somewhat bring herself together, although she is still naked from the waist down. Gets onto the main street and then gets to a phone box, calls her father, and then manages to get to Hollywood Hospital, where she's basically aided and abetted by the nursing staff there.
And police then are called. They take her, they drive around the area, they take her back to the site
Yeah,
They find her clothing.
where they find the evidence. And again, this will become important down the track.
Very much so.
yeah, hugely important. We mentioned in a previous podcast, not sure that would happen now, where you take a very vulnerable, distressed teenage girl back to the scene of where she's been raped not half an hour ago, but
Yep.
that's the way it was done back in the day. And as it turned out, that trip was fruitful, because not only did it she was able to take them to the exact spot where they were able to get her clothes, which will become important.
And the DNA.
And she was obviously also then able to basically reenact it, for want of a better word, on the spot. And so they were getting the victim sort of impact very, very fresh
Yes.
from the horse's mouth.
And I think the prosecution will emphasise that dragging her into bush areas a couple of times that night might become significant
Yes.
to the later crimes.
Now, like the Huntingdale attack, this attack also goes unsolved for some 23 years.
Yes, it did. And it was a major investigation at the time. It was a major crime at the time, as you can imagine. But the following year, we've now learned that it became of even more importance after another teenage girl went missing off the streets of Claremont, and unfortunately hasn't been seen since.
That's right. So we're talking now, we've moved forward to the 26th of January 1996, and this is the night that Sarah Spears disappears. So what do we hear about how that night unfolded?
Well, we've heard a lot about Claremont, about the nightclub scene there, about the entertainment district. It was a very popular area for young adults to go and spend an evening into the morning. And there were two main venues. The Continental Hotel, which is it's a historic hotel on the corner of one of the main Claremont streets. It's a beautiful old building. And it used to be rocking back in the day. It was busy, it was popular, and it was basically the central hub of Claremont and the western suburbs of Perth.
And especially because of Sarah too, she would have gone to school at Iona, which is just a suburb away, and would have been very familiar to her and her friends because it was the neighbourhood place to go.
Yes, it was very, very popular. It was buzzing back then and very busy.
Yeah.
Lots of people out and about.
And then less than 5 minutes walk, 200 metres down the road, is the place where
They went.
if you hadn't finished your night, you'd go,
went back.
you'd leave the Conti at 12 at
Yep.
kicking out time, and you'd wander down the street and go to Club Bay View, which is a nightclub sort of on the second story of another sort of old building, not quite as historic as the Conti, and that was where you could carry on drinking, dancing,
Yes.
partying, doing whatever you wanted.
And then everyone would spill out at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning
That's right.
and look for a cab.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's exactly what Sarah had done. So she'd done Sarah Spears. She was 18, as Ali said. She was a local girl, had been to a college, Iona Presentation College, just at the back. She was bright, she was bubbly, she was sparky, pretty.
And she was planning to go back to Mosman Park, from what we hear, because she had spoken to one of her friend's mother. She'd had lunch with her that day, and they said, if you want to crash back here, absolutely. So we heard that she did call a taxi to go to Mosman
That's
Park.
right.
We've heard about the screams from Mosman Park.
And you were also played in court that voice recording of her calling for the cab, which was
Exactly.
the first time that had been heard.
Yes, very, very chilling hearing her voice asking to go to Mosman Park, which her sister then identified as her voice. And it seems that she was taken to Mosman Park because that's where the screams were all triangled from that area where she should have gone.
Yeah.
It's quite a quiet area. There's a lot of parks and the river there, and on a summer's night, those screams would have been heard exactly where they were.
Yeah, so
sitting.
even in 1990, even if we're back in 1996, we've basically been given a very detailed timeline of exactly what Sarah's movements were right up to that last phone call. And hearing that last phone call was one of the most poignant moments of the last month worth of evidence. We heard it on the first day, and then we heard it again. And to hear her youthful Australian accent, obviously quite tired, maybe a little bit under the weather at 2 o'clock in the morning, but she was doing the right thing. She called a cab. She wasn't hitchhiking or trying to get home on her own. She called a cab, and we've heard from witnesses that said
2 minutes or something, wasn't it?
it was 2 minutes
Yeah.
from the call of that cab to that cab getting to the corner, and at some stage in those 120 seconds, Sarah's disappeared from that corner of the street, and to this day we don't know where she is.
That's right, or how she got to Mosman Park. But as Ali mentioned, we do have multiple witnesses who were woken by
Three. Very
and,
loud
and they
screams.
described these
Yes.
screams as blood curdling.
Yes.
There's also they see a car or the headlights of a car. They hear a car as well.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And they're triangulated, so they're three different types of points in Mosman Park, but they all seem to triangulate to a particular phone box that's been basically pinpointed by the prosecution as where they say that these screams emanated from. And probably most crucially of all those scream witnesses, or the scream series witnesses that there was labelled, one of them was so concerned that he went out on his balcony, looked towards where he thought he saw the scream, heard the scream coming from, and saw a car, a white station wagon with distinctive tail lights that he remembered, that he could see in the distance, which was there, and then literally pulled away as he was watching it.
He noticed it because it was facing the wrong way too, so he's familiar with
Yes.
looking out on his street, as you would know. It was facing the wrong way.
Yeah.
Okay, so in Perth at the time, there's a big campaign. People are looking for Sarah Spears. Have you seen Sarah? If there's any information, get in contact with us. While this campaign is going on, less than 5 months later, another girl disappears.
Yeah. So the Spears family were very well known down south. Their father Don is a sheep shearer, and he was very vocal, very proactive in trying to get information.
Oh, we were involved with him every night. We
Yeah.
were going out searching in areas. They were putting pamphlets around. They knew instantly she just hadn't run away.
Yeah.
Very, very close-knit family, so they were onto it straight away.
Yeah.
And the police were too. It was seen as not just like a runaway, it
Yeah.
was instant. And Don didn't let up. We were walking through bushland every weekend. We had psychics calling who you sort of discarded, and then you thought, oh, well, maybe they're right, and we'd go through other water tunnels and so forth, and they even used the police cadets at one stage to look at a lake because somebody had called in and said they thought that's where the body was. It was very, very intensive.
Yeah, and then in June 1996, as Nat mentioned, that intensity just, increased tenfold when
Jane.
Another young lady, 23, childcare worker, beautiful, blonde, no particular problems in her private life, close family, living with her sister,
and
exactly the same.
look quite like her. The two of them look
A similarity.
similarity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Baby faced, if you wanted to call it that way. And she vanishes. She went for a drink with her mum at the Shenton Park Hotel where her mum worked. Was due to have a haircut in the morning. She had her hair cut and blow dried in the morning. Just a normal weekend activity. Went out with her friends, and then again left the hotel, and 1 minute was there, and the next minute she wasn't.
And again on a long weekend too.
Yes.
Yeah.
The June long weekend.
Yeah. And it's those type of similarities, the geographical similarities, the physical similarities, the timing, the weekend, that immediately it becomes evident that something more than just women going missing is going on.
Yes. Now, this is when in court you are shown footage never seen before of Jane in the Claremont area.
That's right, yes. And we can't reveal exactly what that is because the judge has not allowed some of the vision to come out. We've seen grainy pictures of Jane in the Continental Hotel, but far more graphic vision of her at Club Bayview, which has not been... We've seen it in the court.
Yeah.
But certainly showing her movements, and again showing the girls moving from one area to the other, which is not a big area. It's just around the corner, and they did drift backwards and forwards. So we have certainly seen those movements. Very happy. Others have said she's been sad, but I think they had been drinking a lot, and you see they get sort of maudlin 1 minute and then very happy the next as they've been drinking. In fact, you see her walking down, swaying a bit down the road. In fact, she actually veered onto the road at one stage, and someone has to pull her back a bit, but
and we've talked about plotting Sarah's movements. Jane's movements could be plotted on that evening, certainly when she gets to the Conti, and afterwards be in such detail because so many different angles and different cameras had captured her inside, outside, talking, dancing, even sort of falling down the stairs at one point. And there was, as Ali mentioned, there was some evidence about that at one point she got a bit teary and a bit maudlin during the evening. She, like, I'm fat and, no one likes me. But her friend comforted her and she went back inside and the night seemed to be going swimmingly. And that last glimpse on the CCTV quickly explain it. There were 4 cameras and they were on a 13-second rotation, so it wasn't continuously filming in one spot. And so the last piece of footage we see, Jane is leaning on the on a pole outside the Continental, and then the camera flicks and it flicks and it flicks again, and then
she's gone.
She's gone.
Yeah,
and it's a gap of 32 seconds between the time that she's there and the time that she's not. There are theories about what happened to her afterwards, but what this trial is all about is proving what the prosecutors think happened actually did happen.
And very distressing for her friends too, who are testifying, what if they tried to persuade her to get into the taxi, the same as later on with Kira's friends persuaded her to go into the Claremont area in the first place, and they're giving evidence now, recalling what happened, and very, very sad and traumatic for them.
Yeah. So the last vision we see of Jane is just after midnight. Then in a suburb, 40 minutes south of Perth, again, residents are woken by these terrible blood-curdling screams.
One long scream, they said this time, which stopped mid-scream, but loud enough to wake both heavy sleepers and light sleepers, and all from that same area where she was later found.
Yeah, so this is a suburb called Wellard, it's quite a built-up suburb now, but back in 1996 it was semi-rural at best. But there were houses there, but only a few. And again, the chilling similarities and the overlap that come with these three murders continue to come, and this is basically fresh in the last 4 weeks, that there were two different areas, different residents at different sides of the sort of Wellard main road that had heard similar screams on the same night, loud enough to wake them, and intense enough to really concern them. This wasn't just someone playfully screaming. This was a
chilling scream.
This was a horror movie scream that they heard, and they both remembered enough at the time to report it, and they both remembered enough 20 something years on to recall it in quite gripping and graphic
the one
detail.
couple were right across the road from where they were, and she said she actually heard words to the extent of like "stop" and "let me go."
Yeah, leave me
alone type of
Let me
words.
out of here.
And their bedroom window was really just across the road from, again, a car she said she saw, and she thought she saw a movement again in the bushes. But then they didn't do anything about it until later either.
No. So 55 days later, since Jane's disappeared, this extraordinary set of circumstances leads to a lady finding her body.
Again.
Yeah, just bizarre fate, if you want to call it that.
A chicken.
A chicken,
chicken.
yes.
I mean, a chicken runs across the road and you slam on the brakes right at the very area where they stop and the kids want to get out and chase the chicken.
And Dad lets them, which...
Well, Dad lets them because he's running around.
Yeah.
They live in the area, so it's not like it's that distant to them. And then at the same time, Mum spots these, what she calls death lilies, and gets out, and that's where she stumbles. Literally, she felt something on the back of her leg after being attracted to a very, very big lily. And she said the biggest she'd ever seen. And then she feels something on the back of her leg, which she feels is a stick brushing against her, and it's Jane's foot. And that was, really just... She broke down, actually, describing this.
Well, I mean... I said yesterday it was heartbreaking, and it was.
Yeah.
It was just heartbreaking to see the immediate impact. You could literally see Tammy Evans, her name is, the moment that she had to recall that moment, her face crumpled, and everyone in court would have felt her pain, I think, but no more than Jane's family. Her sister Lee, who was there to hear that account for herself.
And also, coincidentally, there are a couple of people riding horses at the same time, and they come across a knife on the ground while this lady is in the bushes, and that will become significant later also.
Yeah, so I mean, again, another astonishing coincidence that these two. There was a riding stables quite nearby. They'd been on a ride, and almost at exactly the same time as Jane's body was being discovered, meters down the road, they were riding along and spotted a knife that looked completely out of place in this sort of rural setting. A flick knife or a fold-out knife, wooden handle, that was in very good condition and was stuck out enough for both of them to see it, and for one of the riders to basically pocket it. And then they continued down the road after finding this knife to come across the scene where Jane's body had just been discovered. And so it would appear that, well, certainly we know how long Jane had been there, how long that knife has been there, and what significance it might play has yet to play out completely during the trial.
Yeah. Okay, so moving forward 9 months later, in 1997, a third girl goes missing.
That's right. Kira Glennon, a young lawyer,
A woman.
who had just returned from being overseas, trekking around overseas, and returns to her family home for her sister's wedding, goes into Claremont with a group of her work colleagues, and tired, just again vanishes from that very same area.
Yeah. Once again, articulate, good family, attractive, professional, not the type of woman that just disappears. But we now know that she's the third of this type of woman that has disappeared.
And you can still feel too, she's again from the area, feels very, very comfortable in the area. She's just come back from some of the trekking around some of the most dangerous spots of South America, comes back to her neighbourhood with her friends and would feel quite comfortable, and I would say wouldn't be as on guard as you would in some of the countries that she'd been visiting and hitchhiking. So she comes back here, and we've heard different accounts of her reaction to what we called the 3 Burger Boy witnesses who warned her about when they saw her leaning into a car, and she gestures with her hand just backwards, like, as one of them said, "Oh, mind your own business, it doesn't matter, she's okay." But again, she's feeling quite comfortable.
Yes.
So this is being lulled into the old sort of false security of a very comfortable neighbourhood that perhaps, and not knowing exactly, she'd only been back a week, the fear that was being generated around that area, being tired, and she just wanted to get home.
Yes. And you hear in court from several witnesses who see her on that night and describe a woman matching the description
Absolutely,
of Kira.
Yeah.
And some of these witnesses say they see her leaning into a white car.
Yeah, so there were 12 sightings in all of from people who think they saw Kira basically from the moment that she left the Continental and left her friends because she was tired. You know, she's probably a bit travel weary. She had an appointment the next day to prepare for her sister's hen night, right up until the moment that the prosecutors say that she's got into this car, and her movements are tracked all the way down Baby Terrace onto Stirling Highway. Various people see her with her jacket around her waist, walking briskly, and then we get to this final sighting, which is right on outside Hungry Jack's, or Burger King, as it's known elsewhere in the world. 3 men who also enjoyed, probably 1 or 2 too many drinks, and are enjoying a midnight munch at a bus stop, and they see this woman walking on her own
Right across the road from them.
from them, and are so, perturbed, disturbed to see a young woman. One of them who says he thinks she saw her hitchhiking, that they say to her, "You're mad. What are you doing that for? Were you crazy?" And she just waves them off.
Yeah.
And then maybe 150 metres, 200 metres down the road, after they've seen this quite distinctive car drive past, one of them sees who we think is Kira leaning into this car, and once again, that's the last that anyone sees her alive.
2 weeks after Kira disappears, another bizarre coincidence. A man is walking through the bush and he comes across a body.
That's right. He was a little bit reluctant to say what he was doing in the bush because he was looking for some cannabis plants. It was all sort of brushed over, but he, instead of finding the cannabis plants that he was looking for, he discovered Kira's body. He was alerted by an odour, by the smell, and found Kira.
Yeah. Again, bizarre circumstance.
By chance.
Sliding door, 10 metres, 10 minutes further down the road. Maybe he doesn't make that discovery, but he did. There was some chuckling about what he was there for, but that wasn't really the point of his evidence. The point of his evidence was to describe the moment that he did find Kira.
A lot of these witnesses are quite uncomfortable being called. They're also being asked to recall. Someone said to me, well, why aren't they sticking to their statements? I said, well, they can't. They've actually tried to remember what they actually saw that night and what their statements said way back 23 years ago. And, of course, there are inconsistencies and memory lapses. Of course, the ones who found the body remember exactly what happened. but they're not all that comfortable giving evidence. He was a little bit upset at the attention, I suppose, later on. But
the moment after he'd finished giving his evidence and he walked past and just took a moment to shake Kira's father's, Dennis's hand as he walked past, just as a conciliatory moment. That sort of encapsulated for me what we all feel towards all the families of the women that have gone missing and died, because as interesting and as fascinating as the trial has been, always at the back of everyone's mind is what it means to those families, and what it is the effect that it's probably having on those families today and over Christmas and for the months to come.
And Dennis Glennon actually mouths thank you as they walk past to them, because he's in the front row there, and he does acknowledge them as they've come forward and given their evidence.
So what follows next is basically the biggest police investigation in Australian history. Then something happens in December 2016 that nobody saw coming.
Absolutely. That's where your cold case detectives came into light, who were reviewing, and they went back. And of course the technology has probably improved over the years, where they are able to detect things that they weren't able to before. They go back and they match the kimono DNA to Bradley Edwards, but only after following him and finding a Sprite bottle, which again is a very mundane thing to find, but they managed to get the DNA off a Sprite bottle that he had discarded while he went to the movies.
Yes.
So there are, I mean, just to brush over it from sort of 97 to 2016, this investigation is enormous, and over the years, trying to get information out of those detectives has been very, very difficult. Over all that span of time, they were very reluctant to release any detail unless they wanted it out there. And that was the same on December the 22nd, 2016. There were whispers, there were rumours that something really, really big was happening in Kewdale, which is another outer suburb of Perth, working class, middle class. Media started to gather, but the police were saying absolutely nothing. There were some pictures of a chap being led out. There were more rumours. I remember getting a call at home from my chief of staff saying, "Mate, we think you might need to be in court very, very early in the morning for something very, very important." And lo and behold, basically at first dawn on the 23rd, we were given notice that a media conference was being held with basically every top brass police officer you could think of. We gathered at Police HQ, and the then Police Commissioner Carl O'Callaghan said that an arrest had been made in connection with Operation Macro, which is the Claremont investigation, and a person had been charged with the murders of Jane Rimmer and Kira Glennon, along with an alleged rape in Karrakatta in February 95 and a break-in and assault in Huntingdale in 1988. And I will never forget where I was when I heard that, because I was right there. And I will never forget racing up the terrace, St George's Terrace, which is the main road going through Perth CBD, so I could be at Perth Magistrates Court for 10 a.m, where Bradley Robert Edwards made his first appearance. He was read those charges, and we all got our first look at basically the man who the state say is the Claremont serial killer.
Yes, because I remember Susanna Carr calling me too, because Susanna went to Iona, and we thought this was one case that was never, ever going to be resolved.
Susanna Carr, for the listeners who aren't in Perth, is our beloved newsreader here at Channel 7.
World record breaking newsreader.
But also one of the most respected broadcast people in Australia. And
We were on it
would have
right
been
from the
been
start,
sat
yeah.
at the desk
Yeah.
every night when
Yeah.
these girls went missing. The young women went
No, we were
missing.
actually from Claremont. We were telecasting out of Claremont, yeah.
She's reported on this case basically as long as Ali has, which is a long time.
Yeah.
And would have been on the desk on that day. In fact, she was. I remember seeing the report.
Yeah.
As Ali said, it was a day that I think hundreds of thousands of people in Western Australia thought would never happen, that someone would be arrested and charged. And 3 years later, I think that somewhat sense of disbelief that this is actually happening, it's still there.
Now, Bradley Edwards denied all of the charges initially.
He did. Not immediately, because with a case of this magnitude, obviously, vast amounts of legal advice would have been taken before he did. But eventually, so first he's charged with the 2 murders. It takes another couple of years for him to be charged with Sarah's murder, and that's basically due to Sarah's body not being found. So that's a circumstantial case. So it would have taken prosecutors longer to basically pull that case together. But he is. He pleads guilty to, not guilty to all 3, and the rape and the break-in at Huntingdale, and basically the biggest criminal trial in Western Australia's history is set down, which is 3 murders, a rape, and a very serious break-in. So that's where we were at basically for a long time, until a couple of weeks before the trial of the century was due to start.
And the trial of the century is delayed because there's a change in some of the pleas.
Yeah, well, it was delayed a couple of times.
Yes.
The first was because there was more evidence coming in, or more.
It was an investigation on the run right up to the very last minute, with the evidence still coming in and trying to. And the judge was absolutely quite good to allow it to be delayed, because I thought some of those things he could have perhaps made a decision on the spot with no jury.
Yeah.
But he did allow them time for more fibre evidence to be brought forward, and it stop start for a while there, wasn't it? Yeah.
And then we were all expecting to just turn up for what had become quite a regular pre-trial hearing. And then we got another whisper early in the morning, or I did sort of overnight, that there might be some major development happening. And it turns out that Mr. Edwards pleaded guilty to the break-in at Huntingdale and that horrible rape in 1995, leaving him basically pleading not guilty to the 3 murders.
So that's basically the timeline of events from the beginning till the end, and we hope that that has helped those of you following the podcast to solidify that timeline and understand exactly where it is and how we've got to where we are. We are setting up a page on thewest.com.au for all the exhibits and photos that Justice Hall has released to the media. So if you haven't seen them yet, just keep an eye out for those, and we'll have those available over the next few days on thewest.com.au. And we'll be back Monday, 6th of January, when the court resumes. In the meantime, stay tuned for any extra bonus episodes of Claremont in Conversation.
This podcast was hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the 7 Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.